Since November of 2021, the Mamiya RB67 has been my main camera. I've taken this thing all over the States and overseas, and I've loved every part of it, mostly. After my last trip to Iceland, I found myself being burdened by how big this camera was. The weight and size just did not lend itself to be travel friendly, so I knew I wanted something different. When I was looking for a new camera, I wanted to keep a couple things in mind. I wanted it to be the same format as the RB. I didn't want it to be crazy expensive, and I wanted it to be more travel friendly. Enter the Fuji GW670 Mark III. In today's video, we are going to compare the RB and the GW, talking about what I like, what I don't like, and maybe we'll see if this is the right camera for you. Hot tip, use your film holder as trash. Makes it easy. So the lenses on these cameras are a little bit different. On the Mamiya, it's a 127, which equates to roughly like a 63 on full frame. With the GW, this is a 90, which is about a 45 equivalent full frame. So 45 versus 63, and I got my first shot lined up right here. So let's go ahead and do that. And on the Fuji, 1/350th-ish and f8. Looking at this first pair of photos, I want to give a disclaimer up front. So when we're going to be looking at these pairs, I just want to focus on color, contrast, and focal length. The compositions are not going to be the same between the two cameras. Something that I didn't think about while I was shooting was I tended to compose everything on the Mamiya first and then followed up with the Fuji. So some of the compositions might look better on the Mamiya, but that's not what we're going to be focusing on. I just want to be looking at color, contrast, and obviously how the two different focal lengths are looking for each image. So keeping that in mind, one thing that I already am noticing right off the bat on this first set of images is the Fuji definitely has a little bit more contrast and is leaning more magenta. I edited just simple contrast and exposure to these photos, but I used the same edits across both photos, so to eliminate that variable. So yeah, first thing I'm noticing, a little bit more magenta on the Fuji, a little more contrast as well. So let's move on to the next image. So rangefinder versus waist level finder. For focusing, the rangefinder is much easier because there's no like focusing square or like focusing patch on the RB. You literally just have to eyeball it. You just have to crank the focus wheel back and forth until it looks as sharp as possible to your eye. However, there is the built-in magnifier, but you're still guessing at the end of the day. On the other hand, on the GW, you have a focusing patch. So you get to see two images side by side, and when they line up, that's when you know it's actually in focus. But, I mean, overall, I would much rather focus and view through the Fuji over the Mamiya. I noticed on the Fuji that I was focusing past infinity more than I was focusing past infinity on the Mamiya. So not a huge deal, you just have to make sure that you're not over focusing on this guy, but it's not too much of an issue because again, on the rangefinder, you can see it much more clearly. So I want to stop for a second and take a look at these photos because I'm noticing a couple of things. The first thing I'm noticing is the color that each of these lenses are producing. So like I had mentioned before, the Fuji tends to lean a little bit more magenta compared to the Mamiya. That's also true here. By looking in the clouds, I can see more magenta kind of in the clouds in the sky. Another thing I'm noticing is the bokeh in these photos. I'm taking a look at the bottom left corner of these photos. The lens on the Mamiya has a little bit softer bokeh, as you can see. I think that has to do with the extra compression on the 63mm versus the 45mm. So if you were to get closer to your subject or get closer to your foreground elements with the Fuji, you could achieve that same kind of bokeh. The last thing I'm noticing in this photo is how easy it was to focus with both the cameras. And in this photo, I remember I specifically focused on the yellow flower in the middle of the trail. And what I'm finding is it looks like the Mamiya is a little bit sharper here, surprisingly. That flower was really small in my viewfinder, so it was a little hard to focus on it. But overall, I'm very happy with the sharpness and the quality of both of these lenses. So let's stop really quick on this pair of photos. This is the most dramatic difference that we've seen so far and that we will see for the rest of this roll. I'm not too sure exactly what happened here just because these photos were taken seconds apart. I would assume that it's because of the developing. I don't know why the developing would affect one frame and not the other frames. So maybe it's not developing. In other words, I'm not really sure what happened here. So I'm going to choose to just move on to the next one. And that was the end of the 2 rolls I shot on the RB and the GW. Overall, I feel like these 2 cameras are actually pretty similar when it comes to the images they produce, from the color, sharpness, focal ranges. Some of the takeaways that I noticed in this whole roll: the Fuji tended to be a little bit more magenta in the photos, which isn't really a big deal to me. The sharpness of the lenses are about the same, I noticed, but the standout thing that I noticed was just the ease of focusing with the Fuji. Just because a rangefinder, you have a much easier time telling what's in focus versus a waist level finder like on the Mamiya. I feel like I am prepared to say that I would be willing to switch to the Fuji over the Mamiya. However, I still feel like there are some use cases where I would love to use the Mamiya. For example, like portraits would be really nice with the Mamiya because that ground glass is so big. Just being able to see a portrait through there would be much more enjoyable. And I do love both of these cameras. I probably won't be getting rid of either of them anytime soon. But I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. If there's anything that stood out to you guys while looking at these photos for yourselves, feel free to drop those comments below. And I am looking forward to the next video. Peace.